Welcome to Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar here on STL Sports Central. All content provided by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Brenden, Schaeffer, and Stefan, Caray here with you as the season begins to wind down for St. Louis. Only 4 more games left to play in the regular season. And the reason I say that is they're still technically in it from a mathematical standpoint, but they've played their best ball maybe over the last week, which is crazy to think about. They are certainly saving their best bullets for the end of the season. Last night, winning 9-8 in thrilling fashion. Is it too little too late? The answer seems to be yes, but still very, very positive signs going into the offseason.
Yeah, you feel really good about a win like last night, knocking the Giants out of postseason consideration right before the Cardinals make their untimely exit. And look, I mean, there was a moment last night where the Cubs were leading the Mets 6-1, and if that score would have held, okay, now it's suddenly only a 2.5 game deficit, a little bit more room to play with. But we were looking this up before we came on the show here today, Stefan. The Cardinals don't have the tiebreaker against the Mets. Like, if the Mets were to lose every game and go 82-80, or I should say 81-81, the Cardinals could still go 82-80. But when the Mets win one more game, 82 is the most wins the Cardinals can get, and the Mets beat the Cardinals 4 out of 6 this year. So one more win by the Mets would eliminate the Cardinals, and it was close to not needing to be that way. You mentioned, and look, in the quotes from the team, I saw Katie Woo with Alec Burleson talking about, technically it's still a chance, but that's not really the way that we're thinking about it. We're just playing and doing our thing to be able to build upon, what we've done this year and then turn that into more for 2026. But man, when you think back to a couple of isolated moments of this season, for me, it's the Saturday night game in Milwaukee a couple of weeks ago where that's just got to be a win. Obviously, when the bullpen had been as taxed as it had been, you traded away all your top relievers at the deadline. New guys took their places and did pretty well. But then that middle relief group is suddenly guys that are not only unproven, but probably they just wouldn't be in contending scenarios for a team. But that's not where the Cardinals had played themselves into. And so some guys like Ryan Fernandez are pitching and you've taxed some of the others. And hey, Riley O'Brien's not perfect. That's what happened on that Saturday in Milwaukee. But it's like, all right, that's a game they should have won. You flip it. They're at 500 today. And then you can very, very easily, in my opinion, look back to the old Eric Fetty July saga where he made 2, arguably 3 starts that never should have happened under any circumstances. If the Cardinals were worried about anything other than money, it wouldn't have happened. And it's a disappointment. And I consider it the biggest mistake of the John Mozeliak era that it was allowed to continue. Not in terms of scale. Like, obviously, we can look back and say, oh, man, they regret the Ozuna trade. They regret moving a Rosarena. But like, those were things that at the time you couldn't have necessarily predicted what was coming. We have to be like fair to John Mozeliak in some of those dealings. This one, there is no explanation other than, they kind of cheaped out on it. They went for the hope that they could rebuild a little bit of trade value for Fetty and maybe not have to pay as much of his salary down the stretch. And it was for shame, in my opinion, because it maybe cost them 2 to 3 games in the standings. And here they are. So that's maybe old news for people that say, oh, Brenden, it's long over. Why are you still talking about it? I think it's relevant to point it out because it is true that if a couple of games go differently, the Cardinals are very much right in the thick of it today as they are playing some of their best ball of the season, Stefan. But yeah, it's reduced to the idea that, hey, it's a good thing the Cardinals are finishing with pride because a lot of these guys will be back for next year. And hopefully they are learning how to win, whether the games matter or not here at the end of September.
Oh, and by the way, Eric Fetty has been DFA'd now twice and is on a contender without getting anything back for him. So that certainly backfired on St. Louis. I think we've talked about it plenty. And again, hindsight's 2020. But if you roll back the tape to us doing these shows, we said you had to go to Pittsburgh and take 2 out of 3. You had to go to Denver and sweep the Rockies. Now, not only did they not take 2 out of 3 against Pittsburgh, they got swept. Yep. Not only did they not sweep the Rockies, they lost the series.
Yep.
And those are games. That's a 4-game swing that really, really looks not great right now. I look back to that series against Kansas City after they had really built some momentum against the Dodgers. They took 2 out of 3 from Los Angeles, and then Kansas City comes into town. They had one game, I forget who it was. I think it was Palante pitching. I think this was when things started to spiral out of control for him, where the Cardinals built up like a 7-run lead early, 5-6-run lead early. And the Royals came all the way back, ended up winning the game. A lot of different moments that you can point to as a Cardinals fan this season. But it is good to see them inching closer to 500. Again, there aren't a whole lot of things that you can hang your hat on this season. But at least if they can go and have the struggles that they've had and end up potentially 500 or better, that's really, really valuable. And you and I were on the show, I think it was a week and a half or so ago. And I asked you, are the Cardinals going to win a single series the rest of the way? That was with the Brewers, the Reds, the Cubs, and the Giants on the horizon. Well, they won each of the last two. So really, really good stuff from them competing against some talented teams.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it comes with the backdrop of us now knowing the games don't matter. It's unfortunate that it comes with the backdrop of, it sort of being slowly soft launched, that this is going to be more of a rebuild than they let on from the way that 2025 went. Most Cardinals fans I've seen the reaction to that are not surprised. I'm certainly disappointed by it, though, because I don't believe that it fully needs to be that way. Certainly, you're not going out and spending big on the 2026 roster and pushing all the chips in like you did to fill holes at the 2023 season going into 2024. But, I do think that there would be moves in the margins to be made that could keep the Cardinals, who are competitive now. And we just talked about how slim the margins were away from a wild card berth. And instead, it sounds like they're going to go in the entire opposite direction. And that's not me talking about Arenado. It's not even really me talking about Sonny Gray, who are guys on expiring contracts. If you decided that you could save a little bit of money and reallocate those resources elsewhere by moving them, I would be totally understanding of that. But it's the next tier of player like a Brenden Donovan that I think is a guy that if you were not operating in this way from a ownership and front office perspective, you would be talking about him as a building block for the next competitive window of the St. Louis Cardinals. Instead, it feels as though they're going to kick that competitive window down the road a couple of years, by which point Donovan would be eligible for free agency. And so my expectation at this point is that he will be traded in the offseason. And I think that's an extreme disappointment. I know some Cardinals fans see it differently, and certainly it seems that the team does as well. But yeah, it's just those margins that I think are the most disappointing about the way we were critical of the Cardinals for their handling of various number of things throughout the season. Mason Windu very fairly pointing out that Miles Mikolas has 2.77 ERA over the final month. And he's saying, hey, maybe he has earned a contract with another team for 2026. Good for him. Totally agree with that, because I think he wants to continue to pitch. He said that. Doesn't feel like he's going to be in the cards for the St. Louis Cardinals because they don't seem like a team that's going to spend a lot of money this offseason. But it's just really kind of tricky right now to look at the way that the Cardinals are finishing with pride, and then knowing that, a number of the players that are helping contribute to that right now are guys that I think the organization is going to be looking at and saying, oh, how can we extract some value for them as we look to basically take another step back in 2026. It's still potentially going to be a very creative offseason, but I don't know if it's in the way that the Cardinals are thinking, like the Arizona Diamondbacks of a couple of years ago, where you say, hey, we didn't have a really good season, but if we do X, Y, and Z, we can turn it around in one offseason and not significantly raise the payroll. And that was an Arizona team that ended up going to the World Series on a relatively modest payroll, Stefan. And so those are the types of things that I look at and say, man, I wish the Cardinals were more willing to go in that direction, but it doesn't feel like that's the plan.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that point, and I've harkened back to that Diamondbacks team because I was covering those guys.
Exactly.
I want to stay with this point. A quick reminder that this show is powered by Graybar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. The main difference that I noticed between that Diamondbacks team and this Cardinals team is the Diamondbacks had a far better farm system. They had more players in the pipeline that were able to come through and make an impact. Corbin Carroll was a budding star. He had success at every single level. We are seeing that potentially from JJ Weatherholt. He could maybe be the catalyst. But the big trade for that team was going out and giving up Dalton Varsho, who was catching and playing center field for them, up for Gabby Moreno and for Lourdes Gurriel. They were willing to trade one of their assets. Now, with regard to the rebuild ideology, and I agree with your point to a point. I think that they could supplement this roster with better players in free agency and maybe be a competitive team. I'm a bit relieved that they've chosen to at least go a direction, because this year it almost seemed like they were half pregnant, right? Yes, we want to develop, but yes, we kind of want to be frisky and make a push for the postseason. Well, when you spend $2 million in total in free agency on Phil Maton, who end up shipping off anyway, that's kind of a counterintuitive point. I think that looking at them now saying, hey, we are rebuilding, we are at least committed to this idea that, yes, we want to commit through our farm system and see exactly what they have. It is more refreshing than hearing runway, runway, runway. Not to suggest that, again, I know any better than Mozeliak or Chaim Bloom, but as a fan, it's nice to know that they've picked a direction. And
I think that's fair. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off
No,
at the
no, no.
pass
That
there.
was pretty much it. That was my point.
Well, and so here, this is kind of an interesting back and forth because I think your line of thought is very similar to what a lot of Cardinals fans feel about this. Like they have viewed it as half in, half out, and they're frustrated by that. And now it's like, okay, finally, at least they're going to commit to something. And I think I genuinely come at it from the other side of that and don't wholeheartedly agree. I think they tried to do the full like runway was not to win games this year. It was to be part of a rebuild. They just didn't want to use that word. What stopped them a little bit short of this being a true rebuilding year was that like they weren't able to make any moves in the offseason. They didn't add to the team. Like what a rebuilding team does is they don't spend money to add to the team. And they didn't. Like Phil Maton was the only move. And so that was rebuilding. That was skimping when it comes to payroll and just trying to roll with what you've got, which is a very rebuildy type of thing to do. What they weren't able to do in full is trade away veteran players that aren't going to be part of the future in order to expedite that rebuild and give more opportunity to the young players. The chief example of this is Nolan Arenado, but they tried like hell to get rid of him, and they couldn't do it because he blocked the trade that Mozeliak had put together with Houston to be able to get, yes, some financial relief, which is a very rebuildy type of thing to do, but also it would have been the benefit that they could have played Nolan Gorman every game at third base. It would have meant more opportunity for other guys like Alec Burleson. Jordan Walker wouldn't have had to sit as many games. Like it would have been a benefit to the Cardinals, not maybe in their win total this year, because Arenado still played really good defense and he's come up with a few big hits at times, but to the overarching picture of like, yeah, let's retool, let's rebuild, let's reload for the future. Trading Arenado would have absolutely been the thing, and they tried to do it. They would have traded Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras. Those were two guys with no trade clauses that they did not want to move on from. And then the only way that you can say, in my opinion, and I want you to disagree with this if you do, from a pitching standpoint, like we talked a lot about runway and we talked a lot about the retooly aspect of the way they handled the roster this year. It didn't match up with what they did from a starting pitching standpoint. Coming into the year with Michaelis, coming into the year with Eric Fetty, like if you're a rebuilding team and committing to that, what would you do? You would usher those guys out, even if you had to eat some money, and you would allow younger players to take those opportunities. In the case of McGreevy, that would have been obvious. He could have started for the team from day one and would have had a full season to work up. As it turns out, he pitched for half a year. He's going to make, 16 starts, 17 total appearances, and end up with a pretty good sample size to roll into next year, which I think largely accomplished the goal of just kind of getting his feet wet. And so I don't think they have in any major way like held McGreevy back from what he's going to be able to do in 2026 by how they handled him this year. And I think beyond McGreevy, they did not have the prospects or the young players to be able to fill those Fetty spots, those Michaelis spots. And so it was more a matter of convenience that they said, yeah, we're still retooling. Where appropriate, we're going to give the opportunity to younger players. Arenado blocked a little bit of that, but there really wasn't that on the pitching side that we look back and go, man, the Cardinals, they really blew it by not giving an opportunity to whom? I just don't think that they really behaved in any way that was half in, half out. When you look at the reasons they weren't able to be full rebuild season, it was largely because of the old contracts and the no trade clauses that were in there. And you didn't have, like, pitching is a very delicate thing. If they had the young prospects that were knocking on the door and were healthy enough to do so, I think you could look back and say they handled the pitching wrong. The only part of the season that I can really look back and knock the Cardinals for their handling is Fetty making 3 to 4 starts more than he should have. And like, if you do that differently and those starts from McGreevy, they might be a playoff team with that alone is what's kind of crazy about it. So I'm curious, like, generally I agree with you, but what my concern is the way that they could have acted like a rebuild this past year, there wasn't much more they could have done. Right. The way that they could act like a rebuild this coming year is to trade a Brendan Donovan that is basically admitting you're not trying for now 2 to 3 more years because you've still got him under contract and you don't necessarily need to move on from that. If you were to go with that same philosophy next year, you can still be rebuilding. You don't have to spend any money, really. I would sign one starter for $5 million that gives you a chance to not have the bottom drop out of your rotation. But the idea that they don't want to just kind of run it back and that they might trade beyond just the dead weight of veterans like Arenado and Sonny Gray, who are falling off the books in a couple of years anyway. The Donovan one is what sticks to me. I think that's the bellwether of really just how much of a rebuild are we talking about for the Cardinals is Brendan Donovan's and what they do with him.
Yeah, I agree. He's the heart and soul of the team. And the pieces don't necessarily make sense if you keep certain members of the club on the team, right? If they're going to go for a full rebuild, they're going to either break it down to the baseboards of the organization and figure out what do we have as a general rule and rebuild from there. But if not, if you keep them, are you really fully rebuilding? That's the major question that I think is going to get answered. And the magic number for me, when you talked about the pitching, is 7. The Cardinals used 7 total starting pitchers this year. 7, right? Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, Miles Michaelis, Andre Palante, Matthew Liberatore, Steven Matz, and Michael McGreevy. A lot of other organizations have used more than that because they have more than that. Cade Horton is a big example. He's probably going to win National League Rookie of the Year for the Cubs. The Milwaukee Brewers cycled through a bunch of pitching. Chad Patrick, Jacob Mizorowski, Quinn Priester. Those are all names that come to mind. The New York Mets have their 3 best starters, arguably, are guys that made their major league debuts 2.5 months ago. So I think that that's a big point of emphasis, that just looking at the big difference here is, are you more concerned that the Cardinals didn't use those pitchers and have the ability to use them, or are you more concerned that there wasn't enough depth to be able to put them out there? And that's the question that I think needs to be answered. But a quick aside here. Oops, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think the depth part of it is accurate, but it's because of the sins of the previous regime. Like, they brought in Chaim Bloom, they've brought in Serfolio and Matt Pierpont, and like they're going to start to develop those prospects to be a little bit more major league ready when the time comes. I just don't think they had the horses to behave like the Cubs or the Brewers, because they didn't have the Cade Hortons, they didn't have the Priesters or the Mizorowskis to get opportunities. It was just McGreevy, and ultimately he pitched half a season in the big leagues. That's where I kind of find that point of contention. Like, I think with where they were as a pitching depth organization in 2025, they just had to let the clock run out on Michaelis, let the clock run out on Fetty, and be ready to recognize that they did have one guy ready in McGreevy. And when they were so healthy through the first 3 months, they could have acted more quickly in saying, okay, time's up for Fetty. Like, this other guy is ready. And it serves a dual purpose of runway for McGreevy, and we're probably a better baseball team, and we're going to win more games if we go that route. To know that they were a decision away from potentially being in the playoffs this season, that's where I'm more disappointed. And I don't believe, maybe I'm on an island with this, I don't believe the Cardinals need a full-scale tear-down rebuild. They need to trade Arenado, and if they need to basically cut him if nobody wants him, and let Gorman play third base next year, and that'll save the owners a little bit of money. And they need to trade Sonny Gray. If they can get a prospect, great. If it's cash savings, great. And maybe sign somebody for $5 million to take his spot. But I would be rolling with Brendan Donovan into next season. And if you stink, then you can trade him in July. That's okay. But otherwise, I look at a Brendan Donovan and say, tell Cardinals fans that we're not going to be bad for 3 years. The next time we're good, Brendan Donovan's going to be a part of it because of where he is in his career. They're going to go a different way than that. I just happen to disagree with it, but I think reasonable minds can do that. This is a very compelling topic of, like, how bad are really things for the Cardinals organization? Because I look at it and say, next year, while they didn't have the pitching prospects to come help this year, I would be surprised if you don't get meaningful contributions from Quinn Matthews, if you don't get meaningful contributions by the end of the season from Liam Doyle. There are other guys that are actually going to, Ishan Henderson could be ready. Motts could be ready. Like, they're not as far away from it to where I think and there will be a whole off season to explore this, but I think it's a little bit disappointing that they are doing the rebuild thing like 1 year too late, where I actually think they've demonstrated they have enough talent in-house to just kind of play it out. I'm not asking for a free agent spending bonanza. I'm asking for cut some of the veteran dead weight, continue to allow younger players to play, and maybe make one trade like those Diamondbacks did. That's a savvy Chaim Bloom trade that actually gets you right into the mix. Maybe Stefan, your thought is they don't have the Varsho to give up, and they're not going to be able to take on some salary in a Gurriel or whatever that would look like. But man, I would give Chaim Bloom more credit than that and say they might be able to pull it off, because they're not a terrible team. They're going to finish right about 500, and we can count the mistakes on probably two hands that got them from the point of maybe winning 84 to where they are now. I know that was like long-winded, and we were going to kind of shuffle into a different conversation, but this is really interesting stuff to me.
No, I think we should keep it here. I just want to remind everybody that Missouri needs to get ready, and the wait is almost over. DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is coming soon to the Show Me State, and you can sign up today. New Missouri customers can get $300 in bonus bets when we launch on December 1st. Download now and place a $5 bet when we go live. DraftKings Sportsbook brings everything you need to elevate your game day, including live in-game betting, lightning-fast payouts, and endless ways to get in on the action, all right from your phone. And when we do officially go live in Missouri, you'll be betting with the Sportsbook app trusted by millions. Safe, secure, and has fast money withdrawals. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code STL Sports to grab $300 in bonus bets with just a $5 bet when we go live December 1st. That's code STL Sports in partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus, physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Excludes customers who redeem pre-launch sign-up offer. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. So this is an interesting question. And you used the point dead weight with regard to the veterans. Here, I think, is the concern for a lot of Cardinals fans is, did you see enough from your core to suggest that the Cardinals can be competitive with only them? Now, you can subtract Nolan Arenado and say, hey, maybe Gorman getting more playing time will help this team win. Maybe. But was there enough shown by him this year to suggest that he will be more than a guy that is going to strike out 30% of the time, that's going to hit 220? I know that batting average isn't necessarily what matters in the new age of baseball, but to me it does. And you have the majority of your young players hitting below 240 and not necessarily hitting for a ton of power. What is your thought on all that?
So I think this is actually really a valuable way to look at where they're 78 and 80. Can you and I sit here and agree that they'll finish with 80 wins just for the sake of the argument? We say, all right, they'll win a couple, they'll lose a couple. Cardinals are going to win 80 games this year. And you can't play the game. I've played it of, well, if you hadn't started Fetty for so long, if you had beaten Milwaukee when you had him up, if you had beaten Kansas City in June when that Palante game happened, you can't play that because there have been just as many games probably that the Cardinals have come from behind to win that the other team would be saying the same thing. How did you lose that game? Last night was a good example with the Giants. Well, let's say they're an 80-win team this year, which is not a terrible baseball team, but you're looking at, okay, how do you change from 2025 to 2026 and reasonably expect that it's still worthwhile to not trade away a Brenden Donovan in order to just kind of keep plowing forward with what you have? Arenado to Gorman. Gorman this year has an OPS, and it's declined in recent days as well, of 669. He's a below average hitter a la Arenado, and he plays lesser third base defense. But let's just say he's cheaper. He's young enough that let's go ahead and just plug him in there. But let's say he doesn't tangibly change your win total. I'll even say he drops it. If it's a full year of Gorman versus the contributions they got from Arenado this year, let's say they're now a 79 win team. Sonny Gray has not been Sonny Gray, but also he is certainly better than what you have waiting in the wings in terms of major league ready talent. Let's take him off the roster for 2026. Who replaces him? We'll say the rotation is Liberatore, it is McGreevy, it is Palante for now. I know that he hasn't performed well, but that's who they've used in that spot this year. We were already looking for a number 5, right? Because of Miles Michaelis departing. Help me find a way, help my argument. Sonny Gray is replaced by whom reasonably that you don't lose a lot from what he's given you this year with an ERA in the low 4s? Is there a name in organization, or do they have to go outside?
Here I'd kick the tires on Kyle Leahy. That would be my thought, is that he's been a starter before. When I saw him as a starter, that's kind of where his ERA lived. He has a starter's arsenal. And I don't think that, I don't know. I mean, again, you're justifying having multiple starters in your rotation with around a 5 ERA at this point in time. So if really, to your point, I think that's very, very fair, is even if it isn't Kyle Leahy, Kyle Leahy might be able to replace Palante's position in the rotation. You might be able to go get a Quintana, or you might be able to go get someone for $5 million that can be a big surprise in that big ballpark at Busch Stadium. I mean, there might be some guys that have some swing and miss stuff, but also pitch to contact with experience that can help. Yeah.
And you don't think Chaim Bloom, Rob Spolio, and Matt Pierpont can establish, identify, and develop a couple of those guys? I'm not saying it's going to be Dave Duncan Reclamation Project era where it just seemed like Dunk knew who to go get. He told him the 2 pitches to stop throwing. He told him the pitch to throw more. He told him where to locate that pitch because he knew everything about scouting reports. And suddenly that guy's career was resurrected. I'm not saying that this era is the same and the Cardinals can do that with random free agents that they sign off the scrap heap. But I'm not saying that it's not worth a try. In 2023, going into 24, they were willing to give all that money to Sonny Gray, and they were willing to give $10, $12, $13 million to both Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn, knowing that there wasn't high ceilings for those players, but you knew you'd get sturdy contributions of guys who would take the ball. They've been around the block, and that was how they valued that. I know they've moved directions since then, but can this new regime, I'm asking for $10 million to be spent on 2 starting pitchers so that you go in with at least 6 counting Palante, 7 counting Leahy, and then 8 and 9 counting Quinn Matthews, Liam Doyle, going, those guys by midseason could be options. Give me 2 guys at $5 million who can bridge the gap in the April, May, June months of the season until you can see what those 2 prospects might be able to turn into. I'm not asking a lot. I think that, and then you maybe strategically trade a guy like Lars Nootbaar, or if it's Nolan Gorman and a Sajaci plays third, whatever. You trade one of those guys. I'm not saying either of them are Dalton Varsho, because you're not getting the value of what the Diamondbacks got. But like trying to draw back to that comparison, you make a trade that is something that maybe adds an arm, or it adds a right-handed bat for your outfield matrix that right now they don't really have outside of Jordan Walker, whose performance has not been up to par. And suddenly you're like, okay, Herrera's going to catch. You're going to go Herrera and a Pajes or whatever the backup mixture is at catcher. And maybe he's not suitable to be a full-time catcher defensively. We're going to find out, because winning is not the only thing in 2026. I'm totally good with that. But if you don't, like, it really is Donovan for me, because you can make a case that they should trade Nootbaar anyway, because he hasn't performed. He hasn't lived up to the expectations. He hasn't been durable enough, and there might be some value attached to his name. Donovan feels like the guy that is going to be underappreciated. Teams are going to want him because they think they can buy him low, because he's not this superstar player. He's an all-star from this year, but he's like the Ben Zobrist type that was always, I think, underappreciated in the game. But if you can tell me the Cardinals come in with doing that in free agency, where I trust the new development staff to be able to identify a couple of diamonds in the rough for $5 million a pop, and I add that to, I'm gonna pay Palante his $3 million because he's depth at this point for the rotation, and it's not that money is the only thing I'm concerned about as a front office or an ownership group. And I add those 3 pitchers to Liberatore, I add them to McGreevy and Kyle Leahy, and I come in and I say, look, this is an opportunity to potentially maybe surprise some people with how passable the rotation could be. You mentioned it. You had 2 guys with a 5 ERA in this year's rotation, and they're still going to win 80 games. So relative to this year, if you behaved that way and spent $10 million in free agency, maybe it's 12 total, gives you a chance. I'm going to go Herrera catcher, Contreras at first, Donovan at second, Wynn at short, Weatherhold at third, Victor Scott in center field, Jordan Walker, sink or swim in right field, and maybe my left field situation still does need to be ironed out a little bit if I'm trading Nootbaar, but maybe you don't. And suddenly, and maybe they trade Nootbaar for a right-handed outfielder. Burleson is, as I'm going through this on the fly, it's Burleson in left, and then you kind of figure out a DH combination that hopefully can play outfield as a right-handed hitter, because Burley will get off his feet sometimes, Contreras will get off his feet sometimes, and everything works together. That's a lineup that's very similar to this year, and you can go through that lineup and say Victor Scott cannot be much worse offensively. He's been statistically one of the worst hitters in baseball when you look at OPS, when you look at a number of the things. But I also think with his speed and his defense, he's a no-brainer to keep in the lineup. Walker has been putrid, but it can't get any worse than that. Run him out there and find out in a year where you're trying things out again because you're not trying to win. But the one thing you do to take a step back, and a significant one, is say, yeah, Brendan Donovan, we don't care anymore whether he stays or goes. And maybe they can get a haul for him, and I'll say, oh, when the trade happens, I'm like, it was a no-brainer, had to do it. But what I would do is I would extend Brendan Donovan in November. I would say, 5-year contract extension. It's not going to break the bank, but it's going to show fans that, like, we're going to be winning sooner rather than later. That's not what I expect based on Katie Woo's reporting about the rebuild, Stefan. But you do all of those things, and like the bullpen's got Riley, the bullpen's got Swanson, guys that have emerged. JoJo's going to be back unless they decide to trade him. Do all of those things. How many games does that Cardinals team win, assuming like the only thing you have to do is dump Sonny, dump Arenado, and spend $12 million in total in free agency on 2 starting pitchers that may not work out, but I'm trusting the new staff to be the ones that identifies the right 2 names to give you a little bit of pitching depth to help out. How many games does that Cardinals team win? Give me a range. And I'm not, you don't have to stick to it, but I'm just curious if there's any merit to this argument where I'm not saying go for it. No, clear the space for the young guys that could be part of the next core. But how many games could that team win?
Well, youth is a benefit rather than a detriment. And I agree with your point with that. That's why they can be competitive. And when you look back at Fetty's struggles, you look back at let's look back and say McGreevy makes those starts. You probably do win a couple more games. Now, I think they could be an 83-win team. I think they could. I think that's
doing all of that.
I think they could. That's, to me, I'm not going to say that's a ceiling, but I'm going to say
Yeah.
that feels like an upper range of the amount of games they can win. I feel like they can win between 74 and 83 games. They can win 74 games with that group pretty much
Okay.
regardless. Now, the question is, can you compete within your own division? Because the Reds are getting better, the Brewers are getting better, the Cubs are getting better, and the Pirates are getting pitching. So it's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be a gauntlet, and there won't be opportunities like this year where three teams can almost drunkenly stumble into that final wild card spot.
Can I admit that that's the relevant question? And can I admit that the answer to it in 2026 is no? Let's say the Cardinals do all those things and they still win 79 games. But what would they have done that negates a rebuild at that point, other than holding Brendan Donovan and then deciding not to extract the trade value that he has today? What moves make that anything? It's still a rebuild, right? You traded away the veterans. You traded away the contracts.
But the Diamondbacks didn't rebuild. You're right.
Yeah.
It is that
and
you can justify free agency. You can look outside of St. Louis and say this team that doesn't necessarily have a star player, right? They don't have a Paul Skeens. They don't have an Albert Pujols or a Yadier Molina or an Adam Wainwright if we're sticking with the Cardinals. Star players will say, wow, that team won 79 games and I get to play in St. Louis. I think that's the big difference.
And I don't even need that. I don't even need free agency to happen in a major way. I'm talking about scraping the bottom of the barrel for two bargain starting pitchers that, you know what, if it doesn't work out, it's a worthwhile money to spend, because I think that's all they're short of doing to be able to trade away Arenado and Gray and maybe Nootbaar and still replicate about 80 wins, about a 500 team. And you might say, I'm tired of being in the middle. The alternative is trading away Nootbaar and Donovan, and trading away probably Jojo Romero, and trading away Sonny and Arenado, like trading away everybody so that you lose 90 games and just admit that you're rebuilding. There's not really much of a tangible difference other than whatever prospects they could recoup for Donovan and whatever financially ownership gets to save for not extending Brendan Donovan and committing the money to him over the next 5 or 6 years. There's no other tangible difference from a full-scale rebuild and doing it this way other than about $12 million in free agency on two starting pitchers and the money committed to Brendan Donovan. That's the only real difference in what I am proposing and what the Cardinals are more likely to do. 2026, they would not compete in the division. I'm accepting that. They're going to win 80 games. I'm saying that's worthwhile because of the potential that I'm wrong and they actually win 85, 86 and sneak in and are a year ahead. But let me invite you to join me in 2027, where really all of the players that I've said as part of this lineup are still here. Contreras, I think, would be in the final year of his contract at that point in time. And so maybe, you usher him out. But Burleson could play first base at that point. So offensively, I don't think you're worse. You're a year deeper into Scott's career where maybe he's established. You're a year deeper into Mason Wynn, a year deeper into J.J. Weatherholt where he's more established. And so your offense, I think, can largely be the same in 2027. What's your pitching staff look like in 2027 under this? It looks like Quinn Matthews, number 1, Liam Doyle, number 2, Michael McGreevy, number 3, Matthew Liberatore, number 4, one free agent in 2027 after the lockout ends to make it a legit starting 5. That team does compete in the division. And because I think they can do it by 2027 reasonably, if the pitching develops the way that it ought to, it's disappointing to me that they wouldn't see Brendan Donovan as a guy who's valuable to keep around. They would concede 26, 27, and possibly 28. Because to me, there's nobody else of legitimate value that you would be trading other than Donovan. And when they say rebuild, to me, that is a soft launch on the idea that Donovan's going to be traded. I think they're closer than maybe they think they are. And I think it's just an excuse to be able to save money if they really go full scale into the rebuild by trading away guys like that, like Brendan Donovan, who I think can be a winning player for another 5 years. So that's really, I wanted to unpack all of this because we're not really that different in the way that we describe it. That's the one sticking point for me is the Brendan Donovan thing, because everything else that they do, look, next year, maybe they don't spend the $12 million. That would just be a financial saving. There's no reason to do it other than that. And they say, don't care. We're going to start Palante. We're going to start Kyle Leahy, whether he's good or not. And we're going to start a random Max Rajic. You're in the Cardinals rotation, even though you might get eaten alive. But we're just saving money. And that's what a rebuild looks like. You're so close to being competitive. You can do all the rebuild things and spend a little bit of money. And it's still a rebuild, but you actually could win sooner than expected if you do a couple little things You extend Donovan instead of trade him, and you sign 2 pitchers for a very minimal amount of money in the offseason and make maybe 1 trade. You trade Nootbaar for something you can use. That's what I would do, but I just don't think that it sounds like it's going to be. So thank you for allowing me to like yell into the void today, because I think I'm on an island. Most Cardinals fans probably want to rebuild because they like the way that that feels. I'm saying they're doing that anyway, but they don't have to lose while they do it if they really want to be strategic about it.
I think that's expert analysis, Brendan, and I always love your takes and your points. And I think it does come down to one player. It does come down to Brendan Donovan, because if the assessment is that we think that JJ Weatherholt can be better than Brendan Donovan, I think that's what it comes down to. Do they think JJ Weatherholt is going to be a second baseman at the major league level? Are there concerns that he can play shortstop in the big leagues? Are there concerns that he can't play third base at the big league level? They might try to get whatever they can from Brendan Donovan, and I'll be interested in seeing how that happens. But there are only so many things that I can talk about. It's nice to hear you freely speak about just your thoughts and your position, because I trust that Chaim Bloom is going to usher the organization into a great future. I trust that there will be a lot of decisions to be made, and people that are far smarter than I will make them. Tonight, game number 3 of the series between the Cardinals and the Giants. Let me get the official thing set up, because there was a commercial playing as I was searching. And I didn't know if the volume came through on the computer, but it's it's an interesting thing. The Cardinals can sweep the Giants, 8:45 Central Time. It is going to be Sonny Gray versus the
Brubaker.
JT Brubaker for San Francisco. Yeah. And Sonny Gray, again, has had a lot of conversations. Some have tied him to San Francisco. So maybe this start will be an important one for St. Louis in sort of an interesting alternative way, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, if he pitches really well, I think that reinforces how good Sonny Gray could be in the arid climate of San Francisco for a full season. And like, I think it'll be different from Arenado, where right now you're just looking to unload him and you know that you're going to have to eat the majority of the money. With Sonny, I think you could say, look, $35 million, is that a little bit bloated compared to the production? Yes. But could there be a team that would say Sonny Gray pitching for us for $15 or $20 million next year is worth it, and the Cardinals maybe only eat about half of the money and get a decent prospect back? I think that's definitely plausible, especially if there's maybe one more team beyond San Francisco that's interested. Maybe you can kind of play those teams against one another and say, look, this is a way to, you don't have to fight for it in free agency. You just have to make sure Sonny is happy to go to your team. Sonny has had success in the Bay Area when he was with Oakland, and so I feel like he's understanding of what the climate could be for him. He's the first to tell you that it's hot in St. Louis, and that doesn't always bode well for him. So, yeah, I do think that's actually a mildly interesting start. You hope to see Sonny pitch well so that the Giants can go into the offseason remembering that last view of Sonny Gray and going, maybe that would look good for a full season.
Yeah, especially with their young rotation. Well, there's not a whole lot more that we can talk about. The Cardinals look to sweep the Giants and stay mathematically alive for another day. It is an exciting offseason to come, and we will have all the coverage for you here on STL Sports Central. For everyone here at Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar. For Brenden Schaeffer, I'm Stefan Caray, with a great conversation with the extreme intellect of the man who is so on top of Missouri sports, as his Missouri Tigers seem to be disrespected in the AP rankings. Eventually, we'll get down to the world where my beloved Georgia Bulldogs live, but I digress from that point. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we will bring more coverage to you every day with Cardinals and more here on STL Sports Central.